Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. And the answer to that question, which is the title of this video, is that, well, it depends on what conservatism actually is. Full confession, the idea for this video came, shock of shocks, from a fight on Twitter. Jon Miller, the host of the Miller Report, which is on the Blaze TV, tweeted out on Saturday night, quote, "You can be a transgendered American, but you cannot be transgendered conservative. Maybe think about that as you're headed into the office to have your genitals destroyed." And he faced an immediate backlash. Some of the comments were about as articulate and deep as a mud hole. Like Blair, the self-described transgender conservative who tweeted out, "Nice identity politics, you effing lib." Max Kennerly responded by saying that it's a free country, so if you want to destroy your genitals, if that's what rocks your boat, then you should darn well be able to do that. Others, to their credit, tried to go a little bit deeper. Brandon Straka, for example, the founder of the Walk Away movement, argued that people like he and Blair were the ones going onto college campuses, having discussions, conversations, changing minds, and converting Democrats. One Twitter user named Sarah, whose bio says that he is a transsexual Catholic, said, quote, "Anyone can believe in small gov, the Second Amendment, border security, pro-life." This deeper sentiment was also expressed by Brad Polumbo, the self-identified gay conservative writer for the Washington Examiner, who tweeted in response to Miller, quote, "If a transgender person supports individual liberty, fiscal conservatism, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and other conservative principles, why would anyone reject them for differing on one issue? A big tent is the best way forward." He topped this off by saying, "Personally, I think the conservative movement ought to focus on ideas, not identity." And this is, to be honest, the generally accepted definition of conservatism today. If you profess belief in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, individual liberty, low taxes, small government, national sovereignty, etc., then you are ipso facto a conservative. Nothing else matters. And if someone tries to raise their hand and say, that's not quite everything, then they are immediately branded a gatekeeper or as a player of identity politics, no better than a progressive on the left. And this is the lay of the land because modern-day conservatism is actually much more libertarian than actually conservative. There are several reasons why that's the case today, which we're not going to get into specifics here in this video, but two broad reasons can be mentioned here. For one thing, the often acknowledged founder of modern-day conservatism, William F. Buckley himself, leaned towards libertarianism. And his baby and flagship National Review was heavily influenced by the libertarian Frank Meyer. Now, this was not Buckley's intent. His main goal was to actually coalesce all the different elements on the American right in the 1950s and forge them into a unified force against communism. But this was the end result when the second reason happened. Genuine conservatives, like Russell Kirk, stopped associating themselves with National Review. And honestly, with the barrage of assaults on things like freedom of speech, free thinking, national borders that have come from the left, as well as a $22 trillion deficit, then it's not hard to see why things like freedom, lower taxes, small government, and national sovereignty would be made the litmus test for conservatism. But there are problems. One glaring problem is one of definitions. Now, some are pretty easy. The Second Amendment, borders, border security, those are pretty cut and dried. But what about others? What about liberty, for example? What is individual liberty? What does it encompass? What limits and parameters does it have? Okay, sure, I know, don't harm other people and don't trample on their rights, but what's the definition of harm? There's physical harm, emotional harm, psychological harm, financial harm. Does it include all of those different permutations of harm, or only some of them? And if so, which ones? And before we could accurately determine what harm is, wouldn't we have to know what a human person is? Because you can only determine that an action or non-action is actually harmful after you have determined what that action or non-action is directed towards. For example, if you don't feed or water your pet all day and your pet happens to be a dog or a parakeet, you're a horrible person. However, if that pet happens to be a pet rock because you're a real big enthusiast for the 70s, then that changes the equation a bit. What are these other conservative principles that Polumbo mentions, but which remain anonymous and are just shoved unceremoniously into an appendix somewhere? Could one of them be the right to life? Is that important enough to actually be fully listed as a conservative principle? Or can you skip that and still claim to be a conservative because you believe in personal liberty, the Constitution, and small government? That is, after all, what Tomi Lahren did in 2017.
No, I'm pro-choice, and here's why. I am a constitutional, someone that loves the Constitution. I am someone that's for limited government, and so I can't sit here and be a hypocrite and say I'm for limited government, but I think that the government should decide what women do with their bodies. I can sit here and say that as a Republican, and I can say, you know what, I'm for limited government, so stay out of my guns, and you can stay out of my body as well.
And speaking of the Constitution, the left and the right both have their own ideas as to what the Constitution is and what it says and how it should be interpreted. So, are we saying that you can only be a conservative if you agree that the Constitution can only be seen and interpreted in one specific way? Because according to Polumbo, that seems like that would be an assault on personal liberty and a play at identity politics. As you can see, the issue is not nearly as clear-cut as some people would like it to be, even by their own standards. Which actually leads us to the second point. Their standards are inadequate. Conservatism means to conserve, which means preserving something precious from attacks and destruction. And liberty, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, national sovereignty, those are all good things to preserve. Those are all necessary things to preserve. But they're not the only things that need to be preserved. I think that everyone would agree that the main thing that conservatism seeks to preserve and to protect is the good life, the flourishing life, if we wanted to get philosophically poetic about it. Because people are the focal point of any political system. But people can't simply survive on individual liberty and low taxes. They require other things, like justice. Justice so that society is actually livable because we can actually tolerate each other. And we need a justice to tolerate each other so that we know that if our neighbor wrongs us, then we have a path forward to recompense and for that wrong against us to be righted. On the flip side, we need justice to act as a check on our behavior so that we don't screw up, because we know that if we do mess up, then we're going to be on the receiving end of the law. And since you can't have justice without laws, you also need laws, which, if just, are not simply incarnations of pure political power, but are actually products of reason. And it follows from that we need to be a rational society. We need to be a people that cherishes clear and correct thinking, in order to be able to determine what is right and wrong, and therefore what is just, which will then allow us to make good laws. We need the virtue of prudence so that we can recognize which problems are actually political and which ones are not political, so we don't go around treating every single problem in our society like a nail in need of a hammer. Prudence also gives us the practical wisdom that we need to solve these non-political, non-legal problems, instead of just simply allowing them to fester and get worse. From this, it follows that we actually need to know history, so that we can actually grow our prudence by learning from the past. And because people are not simply bodies, but also require non-material things, we also require beauty, not just in a museum that we can go and see maybe once a month, but beauty in our everyday lives, like in the architecture that surrounds us every single day. This was one of the main endeavors that the late great conservative thinker and philosopher Sir Roger Scruton devoted his life to. He actually made an entire documentary about why we need beauty. Brilliant is the only word to describe it. Check it out in the description box below. We also need to recognize, know, and embrace the immutable moral order, or the Tao, not only so that we can know what is right and wrong, but so that we can be truly independent. Because think about it like this. If we know what is right and wrong, good and bad, then we will be able to decide to choose the good for ourselves. We won't have to live under a canopy of regulations that will dictate to us what the right thing to do in every single situation is, like we were a society of 3-year-olds. But here's the kicker. All of those things that I just mentioned depend on the truth. Merlin actually said it best.
Truth. That's it. Yes, it must be truth, above all.
But Nate, quid veritas? What is truth? It is what is. It is reality. It is being. You can't get any deeper than that. And why does everything depend on the truth? Well, think about it like this. If you don't know the truth about justice, if you don't know what it is, what its essence is, then you're not going to be able to implement it, which means that you're going to be living in an unjust society. If you don't know and recognize the truth about what markets are and how they work, then you're not going to be able to implement fiscal conservatism. And if you don't know the truth about liberty, what it is and how it actually works in human nature, then even that is going to be washed away. And ironically enough, what so many people consider the cornerstone of modern-day conservatism. Truth is the bedrock. It is the foundation. And if you whisk that away like a magician whisks away a tablecloth, then everything that you build is going to be a house of straw that, with one gentle tap, is going to collapse. And it's actually worse than that, because if you don't recognize and embrace the truth, then what you're left with is the chaos of nihilism, where nothing is true, because everything is true. In that sort of a world, killing a baby, abortion, can be an act of love. A white woman can actually be a black woman, like Rachel Dolezal. A woman can have a feminine penis. Socialism is the way forward to progress. And of course the Constitution protects polygamy and polyamory and open marriages. It would be discrimination if it didn't. And when you have a situation like that, when the truth can be whatever anybody wants it to be, then inevitably you will end up with a cabal of enlightened leaders who will decide what the truth is, and will dictate to you what the truth is, and will also tell you whenever the truth changes to fit a new facet of their agenda. Because in a subjective society, the truth is going to be decided by whoever holds the most political and cultural power. And this means that conservatism itself will change, something that we've already witnessed in the fight for marriage. When that fight started, 2004-2006, conservatives were pretty fairly unanimously dead set against redefining marriage to make it anything other than the union between a man and a woman. But slowly and surely the right started to change when more and more people started arguing that this was a losing battle. As commentator extraordinaire Mark Stein said in 2014, quote, "Once the question's been settled culturally, conservatives are reduced to playing catch-up, twisting themselves into pretzels to explain, including in the pages of this magazine, National Review, why gay marriage is really conservative after all." And ironically, we're seeing the exact same scenario play out again. About a month ago, the state of Utah decriminalized polygamy, turning what was a felony into a minor infraction. David Marcus over at The Federalist pointed out that this was a direct result of the initial redefinition of marriage in 2015, pointing out that because the definition had imploded and marriage no longer relied on the union of the biological realities of man and woman, marriage could basically be whatever anybody wanted it to be as long as it was consensual. And wouldn't you know it, but Brad Polumbo, the very same, wrote a response piece in the Washington Examiner, which basically boiled down to him saying gay marriage doesn't lead to polygamy. Of course, he didn't really go into details why that is or why he thinks that way. He just pointed out that according to polls, 80% of Americans don't want to redefine marriage again, to include polygamy, which is honestly just sound and fury signifying nothing. So, not only is something that was considered unconservative a mere 10 years ago now taken as conservative orthodoxy, but there is no, and I mean no, philosophical justification for why conservatism cannot change drastically again in the near future. So what is the answer to the question that is the title of this video? Well, if you believe that conservatism is just about preserving a particular form of government, fighting for low taxes, border security, and basically the right of anybody to do whatever they want as long as they don't hurt anyone or trample on anyone else's rights, then sure, a trans person can be a conservative, no sweat. But if the bedrock of conservatism is actually the truth,
Yes, it must be truth, above all,
then they can't. You can have conservative inclinations, feelings, leanings, ideas, absolutely, and that's great. But you can't be a conservative, capital C. If you believe that someone can actually change their sex, or that someone should be able to get surgery to align their bodies with their gender, and that one's identity actually completely and utterly changes when they do that, then you really don't believe in the truth. Or at the very least, you're willing to ignore the truth when it comes to this one area, which honestly is a pretty big area. You really can't get any more basic than the biological sexes when you're down to the individual level. Is this big tent thinking? No, not at all. It's not big tent thinking. But thinking that big tent thinking is the only way forward makes you the White Russians, the group of people who fought the Soviets in the 1920s and who were completely and utterly crushed by the Reds, because the thing about the whites is that they hated each other. They had no common understanding of the good that they were fighting for. The only thing that actually united them was their hatred of the communists, which is great for short-term goals. It's a lousy foundation for a long-term movement. I've said it before, and I will say it again here now. The modern American right desperately needs a deep philosophical discussion about what it actually believes in and what it actually stands for. No more slogans, no more memes, no more talking about our values. We need clear and rational thinking so that we know precisely where we stand, and so that we know if we can keep calling ourselves conservatives. But as always, what say you? What do you think is the essence of conservatism? Is it the truth, or is it something else? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, opinions in the discussion box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. If you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, then show your support by giving it a like and sharing it on social media. And if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion, but from a unique POV, then subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos. Thank you to everyone for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. And thank you to everyone. Thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. And a big thanks to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. Until next week, gang, remember to read, think, speak, write, stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Ciao.